How would you like to learn how to update a table that looks like this into something that looks like this in just a few hours? And this is all with absolutely zero script changes. Join me and learn how to unlock the true power of Blender Toolkit. All right, let's dive into Atlantis. In this video, I'm going to be following this outline that you can see on the left, going from top to bottom. These are all the steps that we'll be going through today. I've already downloaded the project Atlantis, made by the late great Loserman. And first step is, let's just rename this file. Let's save as a new name, so we can always go back to the old one if we need to. So this very first section is cleaning up the VPX file before we import into Blender. This will just make our life a little easier in Blender. We'll be cleaning up the GI lights, the insert lights, and updating a few other options in the table. So I always like to put all the GI lights on one layer because sometimes they're spread across multiple layers, and same thing with the inserts, and then we can work off of those layers. So let's start with the GI. All right, we have all the GI on one layer. I'm going to hide the rest, just show the GI. Notice that for some of the GI light bulbs, there's more than one VPX light, but we only need one VPX light here. Remember, we're going to be replacing all the lighting effects entirely using Blender. So the GI lights in VPX that remain are just used for casting reflections on the ball and for controlling the light maps that will be imported from Blender. So let's delete some of these lights and leave only one VPX light per GI bulb. There we go. Now you got to be careful when you delete a light, because if that light is referenced directly in the script, you'll have script errors. I know that in this case, all the GI lights are just contained within a collection, and then the collection itself is updated. So we're not going to get any script errors by deleting some lights within the collection. All right, let's work our way down this list we see on the left here. So the first thing we want to do is update the GI light fader model. Let's use incandescent. That just makes the fading of the light more realistic. And put fade up and fade down time of about 120 milliseconds, which is good for these old EM lights. I don't really like this yellow color. I'm going to make it more peachy or orangey. This will affect how the light looks when it reflects on the ball. You might also want to increase the size of the light just so that it has more influence over a broader area on the ball, but I'm not going to do that right now. For GI lights, the render mode type halo is required. We want to make sure there are bulbs showing, because those bulbs will come through into Blender. Static mesh, bulb size of 20 works well. Make sure you check show reflections on ball and ray traced ball shadows. Now we want to set the light heights to be about, 28 VP units, which is going to put them slightly above the center of the ball. You know, in VPX, the ball has a diameter of 50. So 28 will be just above the ball when the ball is sitting on the playfield, and that'll tend to make the ray trace ball shadows look pretty good. And that's it. We're done with updating the GI lights. So let's move on to inserts. I'm going to create a new layer for them and put them all in there. Right, all my inserts are on the insert layer. Notice that there's also the bumper lights that I just put on this layer. They don't really fit into the insert category, but doesn't really matter. Okay, let's select them all, go down the list. Fader incandescent. 120 and 120. That peachy colors. All right, well, I'm going to deselect the bumpers now, and I'm just going to work on the inserts. Make sure that those are of type classic. We want to remove the image that's applied to the inserts. Make sure the bulb is not visible. Static mesh doesn't matter or anything. Let's show reflections on the ball. The Z position needs to be 0. And that's it. Let's just make sure that the bumper lights are okay. Those need to be halo. And their Z position is going to be a little higher because, you know, they're inside the bumpers. So this one looks okay. I don't think the bulb visibility matters because, again, those will be inside the bumpers. You won't see the bulbs. Now, one thing about insert lights in some of these tables is that the center of the, let me zoom in. The center of this fall off circle is sometimes down low, but I want to put them in the center. So I'm just going to move all of these to the center of their light areas. Okay, we are done with the lights. All right, we're at this part of the outline now. Table render options. Come over to the table options down here at the bottom. Disable ambient occlusion and screen space reflections. Set the bloom strength to 0. You can play around with those after importing stuff from Blender, but this is the setup I recommend. Next up, we got to convert any bitmap images to either WebP or PNG. When you import stuff into Blender, it does not like bitmaps. So come down to the image manager. You'll see I think there's 3 bitmaps in this case. These guys and one more, that one. I've already converted these to WebP images, so let me import those. There we go. Next up, let's import the VM materials. So come up to Table, Materials Manager, Import, and I have this VLM materials map file. Just gonna import that. That puts in these 2 materials into this list. In the current version of Blender Toolkit, these are not automatically imported when you import the rest of the results from your render. I think in a future version of Toolkit, this will get automatically imported, but right now we just have to do this step manually. I'll have a link in the description to that mat file for you. All right, last step, let's save this and make sure it still runs. Yep. Okay, no errors, so we're good to keep going. Now let's start getting into Blender. Before you launch Blender, make sure you have updated it to the latest version, which is 4.1 right now. And you're going to want to have the latest versions of Blender Toolkit, aka Light Mapper. This is the link, it'll be in the description, but I wanted to point out that you'll want to go to the Actions area and get the latest action. This is the file that you want to download and import as an add-on in Blender. Likewise, you'll want to get the latest Blender Pinball part library. In that case, you go to the Code tab and you just download the zip and extract it into wherever you want. I have a couple videos on how to do this, and those links will be in the description as well. All right, I opened a new Blender file. Gonna delete this stuff and immediately save this file in my working folder. The working folder also includes the VPX file we just saved. So let's go over to the import button and import that file. And there it is. Before we do anything else, I want to come over to the render tab and make sure that my device is GPU compute. And let's turn on the denoiser in our viewport. Make max samples 512 for the viewport and for the render. And we're all set up. Moving on, let's clean up this import. There's quite a few things we need to clean up. So first, let's look at this tree view on the right. So what do we got here in this tree? So in the tree, we've got the VPX import hidden collection, VLM bake, and VLM lights. Toolkit tries to hide things that it thinks you don't want to see. So let's turn those off. I'm going to disable that layer. The VLM bake collection is where we'll set up objects that will be baked. And VLM lights are all the lights that'll be influencing those baked objects. All right, let's go through VLM bake and start getting rid of stuff that we don't want to have in this project. First off, I know that with Loserman projects, there's always this big plane over the playfield, which is what houses the plastics images in his projects. We're going to use that later. It's called ramp 19, so just remember that. I'm going to press the H button to hide it. In the overlay collection, there's quite a few things in here that we're going to want to hide. When I say hide in this case, I mean move into the import hidden collection so that it doesn't have any impact on the project later on. So there's this options menu and all these little flashers that are used. So those, we can just go into the tree and select all of those. Press M to move them into the VPX import hidden collection. Down here we've got this sticky note with the high scores. We're going to hide that. Those are HS blah blah blah. Press select, press M, move to hidden. Let's move the sticky note. Here we have flipper shadow objects. We want to get rid of those. All right. Now I'm actually going to move everything that's in the overlay collection into the parts collection. Now I'm just going to delete overlay. Looks like we have some ball shadows we want to get rid of too. Okay, let's see what this looks like in the viewport at this point. Doesn't look very good. And that is because we need to update our world HDRI. So let's go to the shader editor, come down to world, press home button to zoom in a bit. So this is the environmental image that we want to replace. I have a bunch of HDRI images that I like already pre-downloaded. This Bank Vault 4K is a pretty good one. It's a pretty neutral HDRI. And it works really well. I'll have a link to that one in the description also. Let's set the background color strength to 0.4. Just makes it a little bit darker. And for me, these in the VLM Lights World collection, there's a couple lights that get created automatically at import, and they kind of mess things up for me, so I just delete those. That looks pretty good. Now, in this project, we are not going to render any of the movables in this table. The movables would be like flippers, targets, switches. If you have spinners, that's a movable. Anything that moves, obviously. So let's let's hide those. I'm going to take this movables collection and just drag it into VPX import hidden. So that should get rid of all the movables, but as we see, the flippers are actually still here, and we need to move those into the movables collection. Looking good. Oh, the targets are also still around. Let's move those. I don't know what these walls are, but they don't look like they should be there. Okay, I think that kind of covers all the things we need to clean up. Oh, actually, there's also these two lights that we can see off on the side. It turns out that these lights are the lights that are on the desktop view of VPX. Yes, the desktop view lights actually do come through on the import, so be aware of that. If you press 0 on the nub pad, you can see what Blender will use as the render point of view. This doesn't look like the way we want it, so there's a nice camera fit tool in Blender Toolkit. If you have the cursor in the viewport and you press N, click on the VLM tab and click Fit Camera, which is near the bottom. So that sets up the camera nice and tight around the table. All right, the last step that I want to do in this cleanup effort is clean up the VLM lights collection. Right now, the VLM lights includes an all lights sub collection, which just has everything in there. I want to split out the inserts and the GI lights. So let's create a new collection. Let's call it GI. Select all our GI lights. Move them into the GI collection. I'm going to rename all lights L just to keep it short. Collection names in this VLM lights collection show up in VPX when you import stuff. So there's a maximum length for names in VPX, so it's best to keep these collection names very short. Cleanup is done. Let's move on to the lights. When you start looking closely, you'll see that the GI lights are not quite positioned correctly. See how the bulb is sitting above the surface of the playfield? That's not good. So that's true for pretty much all the GI lights. There's actually a couple lights down here that don't even have bulbs, so we're going to have to add those. We're going to want to move the bulb and the bulb socket along with the associated light. But first, let's move the bulbs. The bulbs are in the parts collection. You can see there's GI light bulb and socket. We'll just select all those. Let's zoom into one to see what we're doing. Press G and then Z to move along the Z axis. There we go. We move the bulbs down, but the light is still above the bulb, so we got to move those down. Put them right around the filament. Okay. Yeah, some of the bulbs are not quite centered over the holes in the playfield. We can fix that. I'm not going to fix that right now, but if I was being very meticulous, I would. So looking under the playfield, we see there's a couple lights that actually are too low now. I'm going to select those and move them up. And we need bulbs for those. I'm going to press 7 on the numpad to get a top view. I'm just going to select bulb and socket to duplicate. So selecting those and Shift D to duplicate. I can move it over. I'm going to hide this bracket for now. Press H so I can see what I'm doing. Let's duplicate those again. There we go. You know what? It's going to annoy me that these bulbs are not centered over their holes, so I'm just going to move all of those to the correct locations. When you're moving stuff like this, you want to be sure you're in the straight down view, which you get to by pressing numpad 7. That way when you press G to grab, it only moves it along the XY plane. Hey, look at that, we're actually missing a light bulb. We'll have to fix that. All right, to fix this, I'm going to duplicate a light bulb and socket set. To add this light, we're going to have to add it in Blender and then eventually add it back in VPX. So I've selected one that I want to duplicate. Just move it over here. Well, let's call this one GI Light 29. We're talking about this GI Light here. And we'll need to update the VPX Light name to GI Light 29. We're going to have to remember to add that back into VPX later. So this VPX Light name is important because this is the name of the light in VPX that will be used to control all the light maps that are created for this GI Light 29 in Blender. Okay, the GI lights are all created and positioned correctly. They look good, but they're very white, and we know that incandescent lights are not white. They have a like an amber look to them. So let's make sure we set up our Blender GI lights to look more realistic. I'm going to select all of them, do Control L, and link all the object data. So that means now if I change the color of one of these lights, all of them will be linked and they'll all have the same color. I'm going to select one, come down to the light properties pane, and let's use nodes for this. So click use nodes. Now down here I'm going to select object in my shader editor. Press home. This is the node setup that controls the look of this light and all GI lights now that they're linked. I'm going to add a black body node, connect the colors. And there you go. It immediately changes the color of all the lights. Now we want the temperature of the GI lights to be about 2700. And that sets the color temperature of these lights. GI lights are done. However, there's one important thing to remember. For the GI light collection, we want to make sure that it's a split collection. So that means all of the lights in this collection are going to be rendered separately. They'll all have their own light maps. And that way in VPX, we can cast ball shadows from each light independently. Moving on to inserts. Note that the L light collection is already split, which is what we want. That's because all the inserts are controlled separately. So if they're all grouped, then you couldn't control them separately within VPX. All right, zooming in to some of these inserts, we can see that there's this weird little point light thing. That's because each insert light is rendered as a point light. I found that for the most case, it's a little bit better to convert these lights to area lights, and I'll show you how to do that in a sec. But first, let's do like we did with the GI and link the object data for all the insert lights. Note that I'm not going to be doing that for the bumper lights. The bumpers are separate, even though they're in the same collection. So let's select all the insert lights. All right, Control L, link object data. Again, let's use nodes and add black body. And while we have all the lights selected, let's just move them down a little bit. So G, Z, move down. That's good, minus 0.06-ish. All right, clicking on one of them will convert the light to an area light. Make the shape disc shaped. Okay, make the size, let's say 0.5. Now, looks pretty good. Might want to make them a little brighter. I don't know. Let's say 50 milliwatts. See what they look like when we turn them off. Cool. You could spend a lot of time tweaking the parameters for these lights, but for now this looks good. I'm just going to move forward. Okay, let's let's move on to plastics. Remember that we had a layer called ramp 19. This guy that I hid earlier. This is what it looks like when I show it again. It doesn't look very good. That ramp, I don't know, it does weird things to the render. But you can see that it includes the picture for all the plastics, and we're going to need to make plastics models for those. It's not too hard. Take a top view, and I'm going to move the plastics off to the side so we can work on them over there. By the way, we're in this section now. Before I do anything, I want to rename this ramp 19 to plastics. So to cut out the plastics, you put this into edit mode by pressing tab. Pressing K gives us the knife tool. And you can just click around the perimeter of the plastic. Try to get as close as you can to the actual plastic shape. All right, once you get almost to the end here, double click, and that closes off that circuit. Don't press enter yet. We're going to do this for all the plastics, and at the very end, we're going to apply this cut. So I'm just going to go ahead and do all the plastics now. All the shapes are outlined with the knife tool, and now you press enter to apply. And there you go. Cuts them all out. Now you can select all of them using the face select tool and press P to separate the selection. All right, so getting out of edit mode now, I can actually move this plane away and I'm left with just the plastics object. I'm going to delete this this guy on the right. I don't need that anymore. And here we go. So in some cases I might want to separate all of these so they're independent, but it's okay that they're all together in this case because I don't want to move them around independently. They're just all grouped together. Okay, now let's open up the Blender Pinball Parts Library. I'm just going to drag a new area over and select the Asset Browser, Pinball Parts Main. Pressing T collapses that left menu. And here we have all the beautiful pre-made pinball parts. One of them is a plastics. So plastics with decal. Let's grab that one, drag it into our model. So this has all the modifiers and materials that we want to apply to our new plastics. To do that, you click on our new plastics, shift and click on the example plastic, and then do Control L to copy modifiers first. Control L again to link materials. So when we link the materials, it's going to apply the materials of the last selected item to all the other items that you have selected. And you can see that, we've lost our plastics image, which is to be expected because part of the material setup for the plastic is the image itself. I'm going to delete our example plastic now and go back to the main plastics. In the shader editor object view, select the plastic decal, which is in slot 2. Press home. You can find where the image is defined here. Let's select the correct image from this list. So it's called VPX Plastics Atlantis. There it is. Now we can drag this over to where it was before, or we can just set the origin back to 0. That puts the plastics back where they should be. I notice that this doesn't look so great. It looks like the plastic's not quite aligned correctly with the post. And that just must be how it was aligned in the original VPX file. So let's see how to fix that. But before I do that, also notice that the plastics are a little too high. They're sitting above the posts, and that's true across the whole playfield. So I'm going to align it in the Z direction first, since they're all connected already. So GZ, drop them down a little bit. Got to be careful not to drop it too far down, because if the posts poke through the bottom of the plastic, you'll see them, like in this case. So I'm going to lift it up just a little bit. There we go. You also notice that these nuts, they're like sunken into the plastic. We can move all those up. I'm not going to do that right now, because I think what I'd really want to do is replace all these with hardware that's in the Pinball Parts Library. I can just show you how to do that real quick. Let's say we want to replace this with one of these pieces. Drag it in. Then you can move it around. You can delete this one and put that one in its place. But like I said, I'm not going to do that at this point. Also, I want to realign this guy. So Let's solo the plastics by pressing slash on the numpad. I'm going to put it back into edit mode. I just want that guy to be separated from the rest. So I'm going to select that, press P to separate, and go back into edit mode. So now this one is separate from all those. So let's get out of solo by pressing slash again. I'll look straight down. I want to rotate this a little bit. Remember, it's rotating around the origin, which is at the 0, 0 position in the far upper left-hand corner of the playfield. I could realign the local origin of this plastic to be centered, and that would just have it rotate around its own center. But in this case, I'm just going to work with it how it is. That looks a little better. All right, we have plastics. Save. Moving on to updating some materials. I'm not going to get too deep into materials. I'll show you some quick tricks to make things look a little bit better. First of all, I noticed that I still have some things hidden, like that bracket over the rubber on the left side. So let me make sure I'm showing everything in the parts collection. So, all right, so let's make the metals look a little bit better. See how this metal wire looks very different from the metal bracket. I'm going to make all of them steel. There's a pre-defined steel material in the parts library. Just drag it over. Yeah, that looks a lot better. Do that for every metal wire. There's some other steel components that I'm updating. Okay, here's something else I want to fix. You can see that these lane guide things are a little too high. You can see that sitting above the posts. So I'm going to, and in this case, it's actually popping through the plastic. Yeah, these screw heads, they just look freaking horrible. I'm going to replace them. I can't help it. Some guys get really particular and they do not like having the screws all pointed in the same direction. So if you want, you can press R and rotate the screw head a little bit. I don't know. Depends on how anal you're feeling. Okay, last thing I want to do materials wise is fix the translucency of these bumper caps, because you're not seeing any light pop through those at all right now. Let's go to world real quick and turn the lights way down. It's like 0.05. Yeah, you see that there's really no light coming through the caps at all. So let's select those caps. Actually, they're already material linked, so I can just select one. And in the object view, the shader editor, let's just set the translucency to like 0.4-ish. That helps a lot. Blender materials is a very big subject. I don't want to get into that, and I don't know much about it, to be honest. So we might have a later video that goes more in depth into how to set up materials so that they look really nice in Blender. I think that about does it. We're getting really close to rendering now. I'm going to come back and set the world color strength back to 0.4. I think it'll match the original Loser Man lighting a little better. We are getting into the render and VLM settings now. The render settings, we already set up max samples to 112. Coming down to the scene tab, we can close VPX importer because we're done with that, but the VPX Light Mapper settings are what's next. Eventually, we're going to want to render in 4K. So what I mean by that is that the height of the playfield is 4K or 4096 pixels high. But I highly recommend that you do not do your first render at full resolution. So this render ratio is your friend. Set that to 25%. So what that means is that we're going to do our test render first at a 1K playfield render height. So it's 25% of this render height. And that'll render a lot faster, and it'll reveal, issues that we might need to fix before we go to the full resolution. Let's set max lights to 12. Set backface to 40. Texture size to 8K. That's going to be the height of our nest map textures. Export mode to hide. And that's it. We are down to the run batch section of the outline here. So first, let's save everything. Before you start running the batch, definitely make sure you toggle on the system console. So this window will show you all sorts of messages as the batch progresses. Without it open, you won't know what's going on, and you won't be able to open it once you click batch all. So do it now. We're ready to go. Let's render our first test batch. So when I hit batch all, what it's going to do is it's going to step through these different steps, starting with groups. When groups is done, it'll move to renders, then to meshes, then nest maps. At the very end, it'll export all the results to the file that you are pointing to in this location. So it's this file, which is the one we use to import everything. You ready for this? Cross your fingers and batch all. Wow, this ran in just under 14 minutes, and I think I made a mistake because last time I did this when I was preparing for this video, it took about a half hour. And I just noticed that I forgot to turn on the world light. So I had this camera and this eyeball unchecked. The camera is the important one. If that's unchecked, that means that the renders won't account for that light. And the world collection is a solid light mode collection, which means that the light from that HDRI that we set up at the beginning, that's the light that gets applied to all the bake maps. So it's like what the table looks like when all of the table lights are turned off. So with that disabled, we have no bake maps. If you look in the VLM results, it has a bunch of objects in it, but none of them are bake maps. They're all light maps. You can tell because the prefix is LM. There's no BM objects in here. So I made a mistake, but I thought it was useful just to show you my mistake because it's an easy one to make. That means I'm going to need to redo the batch. So I think it's useful to see that process. So what I usually do is I select all of the objects in the VLM results collection, and I delete them. And then I go into my working folder and I will delete everything in the bakes folder that's in there. Delete the whole folder in this case because we're going to redo it. One more thing we want to delete is the VPX file that was created when all the results got exported. Delete that. Oh, look at that. All those screws. Here's another mistake. See these screws? Remember I added those? Those actually need to go in the parts collection. All right. Well, I'm glad we caught that. Let's do this again. So VLM bake and VLM lights are set up correctly now. They're all going to be showing in the renders. VPX import hidden is not going to be rendered. That's correct. All right, I think we're good to go now. Let's try this again. Okay, well, this still only took about 16 minutes, but happily there is a parts bake map and a playfield bake map in our results. Let's see what it looks like in VPX. We have this new VPX file with a -VLM at the end of it. This was created when Blender Toolkit exported all the results. Here we go. You can see this mess here is all stuff on the VLM Light Maps layer and the VLM Visuals layer. You can also see, let me turn off the playfield backdrop and the grid. Okay, so here are all the bake maps. Those are on the VLM Visuals layer. So we know before we press play, we know we need to add a GI light. This GI Light 29. So let's do that before we do anything else. I'm going to copy GI Light 28. Rename it to GI Light 29. And we need to make sure that it's in the flashers collection like all the other GI lights. And that's it. Just want to check one thing. I want to make sure that the GI Light 29 light maps, like this one, it's pointing to GI Light 29. So that means that that new light that we just created is going to be controlling this light map. All right. Let's press play. There it is. Hey, it looks pretty good. Now it's low resolution, as expected. But it all works. You can see that because the flippers were not baked and the targets were not baked, they definitely look pretty flat, you know, there's no texture on them. And they stand out a little bit because, you know, the lighting is inconsistent with the rest of the table. So we can try to fix that a little bit, but ultimately we're going to need to bake those if we want them to look right. And maybe we'll do that in another video, but that's a more advanced topic. One other thing I noticed is that the instruction cards are missing, so we have to fix that. And I want to increase the brightness of the bumper lights, and we'll have to do that in the next bake. But one thing we can do to try to adjust the way the flippers and the targets look relative to the rest of the table is to go into the tweak menu. And let's just drop the day-night slider. All right. So that kind of makes the flippers a little darker, and the targets, I think maybe 10% is about right. And that's just a real quick fix. So one thing to note is all of the bakes, the blight maps and the bake maps are not affected by the day-night slider, and that's by design. If we wanted to make the table lighter or darker, we have another method to do that. And that's covered in a video I made a while back. I can post a link to it. It deals with room brightness. So there's a couple things I want to fix, and this is why we do a test bake, because there's always something that needs to be fixed. I've never had a project work the very first try. So to fix the visibility of the instruction card and this other one, which is the replay card, I'm pretty sure this is just because they're below the bake map primitives. But we can just increase the height of those guys to, like, they're at 66 now. Let's make them 68. I think that'll fix it. And going into the lights tab, we said that a day-night slider value of 10% was good. So let's set the scene lighting scale to 0.1 or 10%. See what that looks like. I was wrong about the cards. Bring them up even higher. Actually, I think, oh, they're just not visible. Okay, there they are. I'm also not quite liking how yellow the GI lights are, and I think I know what the issue is there. So back into Blender. Let's save this because we're going to be using this file as a basis for our next update. I'm going to save it as V2. All right, we're back in Blender, and we're going to want to rerun this. Probably want to save the file as a new copy. Call it Atlantis V2. And we'll delete all the results like before. I don't need to delete the bakes directory because since I've saved this file as a new name, it'll create a new bake results directory. This next one, I'm going to probably just go ahead and do the full 4K bake. The two things I wanted to fix in Blender this next bake is I wanted to make the bumper cap lights brighter. Let's just go ahead and make those 5 watts. Let's see if I set the environmental lighting down low. Yeah, I feel like that's going to be a little better. This back to 0.4. The other thing I wanted to fix was I thought that the GI lights looked a little too warm in that last run, but I don't. So let me click on one of the GI lights here. The black body is set to 2700. But I want to set this color to full white because I think the color also has an influence. It's like an influence of the black body color and this this other color here. So hopefully that fixes it. Normally I would do another test batch, but I'm just going to go for the full 4K resolution. Make sure we're pointing to the new VPX file. So it'll export to that one. Save. Get our console window open and batch it. That was not bad at all. 2.5 hours for a 4K render. Pretty good. Let's go check out the VPX. So we've got this new Atlantis version 2-VLM file. Press play. Nice. And there's one more thing I want to check out before we call it good. I want to make sure that we're not skewing the colors by using a weird LUT. So I'm going to put none on LUTs. And often I feel that Tony McMap face tone mapping looks a little bit better. It's supposed to be more realistic. So let's see what this looks like. Oh yeah, that looks so good. Those shadows. At this point, I'd be inclined to fix a few other things, like maybe update the physics, improve the ambient ball shadows a little bit. But this is like 80% of the way there, and it only took a few hours. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you learned a lot, and please give it a try. It's not hard. It's somewhat addictive, actually. Once you figure it out, you'll want to keep on doing more tables. Trust me. Until next time, see ya.